Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Eczema Podcast. I am so happy to invite two wonderful guests to the show today. They are such warriors in helping the eczema community, and they are from the Global Parents for Eczema Research. They've done so much work and they've done a lot of research into the area of eczema and also helping parents as well who have kids who suffer from eczema. So I really appreciate everything that they are doing. And I am here to welcome them to the show today. I have Korey here and also Keri, and they are from different parts of the States. And I'm just so excited that they are here to talk more about their organization and all the wonderful things that they are doing for the eczema community. So I appreciate them, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves and also share about how they got started with their organization. So I'll let you guys take it away.
Great. Keri, why don't you go first?
I'm Keri. Like Abby said, I'm in the central part of the U.S. I'm in Oklahoma, and I first found GPER, or Global Parents for Eczema Research, online, I think on Facebook. And so I didn't really know Korey in person and just started interacting as an eczema caregiver myself. I just spend a lot of time online in that world. So I started just getting involved and finding ways that I could be a part of the work they were doing. And I think that it's unique. It's based on children. I guess adults kind of have more options available to them sometimes. And as a parent, I know I felt really, I don't know, not limited by the options, but limited by what I could find. And that was a big struggle, like not being able to fix your child's quality of life. You know, it's a big deal when eczema's controlling all these parts of your family. And anyway, we just, about 3 or 4 years ago, I started working more and more with Korey, and now we stay really busy trying to serve caregivers and the pediatric population.
That's amazing.
Yeah, I was thinking the other day how, Keri, I probably sometimes talk to you more than my family in a day. We're always chatting, texting about work, so it's been neat. So yeah, I'm Korey. I'm the co-founder of Global Parents for Eczema Research. I also have a son with moderate to severe eczema. And I think a way that our group is a little different is that everyone involved does have that personal connection to eczema. We're all parents or caregivers to children with the condition. I started to talk before we started recording about how we got started, so I'll give the recap. Hopefully it'll be as good the second time around, but it's always a challenge. But essentially, the group grew out of the personal experience of having a child with eczema at a time when there just really weren't a lot of treatment options, and there hadn't been a new treatment option really in 5 decades. And so what I experienced and what a lot of parents experienced is when the treatment that we had wasn't working, you're kind of stuck. The other options are worrisome. You know, in the case of my son, he couldn't do light therapy because his skin was too raw to really put, you know, UV light on it. And so then you're left with older generation systemic drugs that are used for things like organ transplant, haven't been tested in kids, and have super concerning side effects like liver failure. So that was the state of play. That was the state of affairs back then in 2015 when my son was at the worst of his eczema. Layered on that, you have every person you run into giving you advice about how to treat your child's eczema, creating more confusion. And then you have, in many cases, care providers offering conflicting advice or sometimes completely opposite advice. For example, you should bathe your child every day, and the next one you see says, whatever you do, don't bathe your child, it'll dry out the skin. So it just creates this feeling of chaos for parents and patients where you don't have great options, there's conflicting advice, and you're left to sort of navigate things on your own in this kind of fog. In 2015, two parents, myself and a dad here in California, got together and formed Global Parents for Eczema Research to really push for better treatments for these kids. We thought we could do better by these kids, better information to guide decision-making so that we're not just guessing at this, so that we actually had research to guide the decision-making for parents, and to kind of stop this experimentation that was going on kids. So we got started. We really focused on trying to collaborate with researchers on studies that we thought were really important to families, and we did surveys to assess that. We did have quite a bit of progress on a number of fronts, but one challenge that we consistently ran into was that we kept coming up against this misperception that eczema is just a baby rash, and it's sort of not worthy of funding, of research attention, of really having an organization that focuses on it. And there's this widespread idea that it's this minor rash that's going to go away soon anyway. So why would we invest time and effort into figuring it out? As that, kept becoming an issue, we decided we really needed to do some work to change minds about the true impact of eczema, which people just don't see. It's hidden under clothing, it's hidden in the homes. And the suffering that's going on is really unknown by people. So to address that, we conducted this survey last year, to look at burden on families. So not only the child, we know these children suffer tremendously, but so does the whole family, and to really look at that more carefully. After we started the survey and completed the survey, we also collaborated last year on a really large meeting that was done in collaboration with other patient organizations and the FDA, called the More Than Skin Deep meeting, where we really invited caregivers and patients to tell their stories. And I think those in attendance who didn't have personal experience with eczema were really shocked by some of the stories. And I know you were both there, but there were times when every person in the room was crying, literally, where we were all.
I cried too.
Yeah, there was so much pain, I think, that we've all been through, and due to this condition, and just to never be in a room with other people who understand it and have that empathy and knowledge was really powerful. So that's the backstory to the study that you mentioned. And happy to answer any questions about that. And then Keri, I don't know if you want to add to anything I said.
One thing that you said was that it can feel hidden. And there are two things. Like, my son's eczema wasn't on his face. It was like trunk, arms, and legs. So if he had long sleeves and pants on and shoes, you might not know if you were our neighbor on the street, you wouldn't know. And then the other way it's hidden is, like, he might be playing happily outside with the neighbor kids until it's 6 or 7 o'clock and it's time to come in. And it was like, once we closed those doors, there was just, everything came crumbling down. And we thought, man, people know, like, our neighbors know what we're struggling with. They know that we're not sleeping. They know that we're a mess. But, like, it was like the moment we shut the door for bedtime, it was just, the world, fell apart. And it was just like, nobody knows what's going on behind these doors. So hidden in two ways. Yes, that brought back some bad memories.
Thank you for sharing. Well, I really and also resonate with what you said about how it's hidden. And it's a big struggle especially when there's, sleep disturbances at night. And maybe that's also a good segue to talk about the study that you guys did on the impact of atopic dermatitis on caregivers and families as well. Because we all know that when one person in the family suffers from it, the whole family suffers from it too. And I love that the study that you did, which I will also link in the description, I love that it also looked into 9 aspects of life that it affects. So I love that it looked into sleep, social isolation, time put into it, life decisions, family relationship dynamics, energy and fatigue, mental health impacts, and unmet treatment needs. So I would love to really dive into this study and some of the findings that you guys found as well.
Sure. Yeah, thanks for that intro. And I can start us off and then maybe I'll pass it to Keri. But a couple of things to note about this study that I think are unique. It was entirely led by either parents of children with eczema or a patient with eczema. So our whole study team and every author is either a parent or a patient. One of the investigators is a physician researcher who's also a patient. So it was really unique in that way, in that we could create a survey that was so grounded in our personal experience and so responsive, I think, to what people are going through. And we actually saw that in some of the comments, people saying, you know, I really felt heard by this survey. So that was a unique response, I think, to something that was meant to be a research project. But I'll say this was a global survey. Most of the parents who responded or caregivers had children with moderate to severe eczema, so pretty serious eczema. Yet what we found was surprising. I mean, we saw a greater impact than even we expected. So I'll maybe highlight some of those key areas. One thing that I think is really underappreciated that people don't see is the routine and the regimen of caring for a child with moderate to severe eczema is insanely time consuming. So it is taking so much time to bathe and wrap and moisturize again, and all the other things you do around food and laundry and bedding. Those things add up. And the mean number of hours per week that caregivers were putting in for the care of eczema was 20. So that is a full part-time job they're doing on top of everything else that they're already doing. And that's a lot. And what's happening is that because eczema is taking up so much time, it's crowding out everything else. So quality time with the family, hobbies, downtime and self-care for caregivers, vacations, anything else that you might do that would bring enjoyment to your life is being crowded out by all the time that's needed here. So that was a surprising finding for us. Second, the psychosocial impact on caregivers is so underappreciated. And I just shared a personal story today about my experience with our group in sort of acknowledgement of Atopic Eczema Day, which is coming up on Monday. And it just really made me think of this study because my own experience so aligns with it. So the levels of worry, of helplessness, of sadness and depression that we saw in our study were really sky high. And this is the typical experience. This is not the exception. It's really the rule. That really came out in our research. Why is it like that? Well, these are parents who are up all night with a suffering child who don't have a way to help. And that recipe is really crushing. So we saw 2/3 were fatigued often or all the time. I would describe it more as exhaustion than fatigue, but it's profound. 82% said they worried often or all the time about their child. 74% said they felt a sense of helplessness often or all the time. And 50% said they felt sad and depressed often or all the time. It does not paint a picture of a caregiver that's thriving, and we really need to bring some attention to this and get support for these families was the takeaway. I think finally, we were surprised by this final finding, which is the impact that this supposedly superficial skin condition is having on life decisions for families. We saw that 1 in 3 said that eczema was impacting their decision to have more children, and 1 in 3 said that it impacted their decision to work outside the home. So this, what's viewed as a rash is completely changing the life decisions for these families in some cases. So, you take this together and you see that this condition is having a really profound impact on kids, their caregivers, and their entire families. So that's what I think I take away from the research. And I don't know, Keri, if you wanted to add to that at all.
I'm just going to put up that, I'm just putting up that if you're watching the video podcast version on YouTube, you can see that there's the graph of the eczema care hours, and it just goes from 10 to pretty high, like 40 hours, or almost 40 hours, 10 to 35 hours a week, if I'm reading that right. And it seems like a lot of work for caregivers. And I can see and I can imagine the amount of burden that it would have on people.
Right.
Yeah.
So with that highest data point on the graph, those are the families with the most severe kids. And so that's why you see their time investment getting larger. We saw a linear relationship, meaning the more severe the eczema, the more time you're putting in, which makes sense. But that's what that graph was showing. Sorry.
Same amount of time as a full-time job.
Right.
Full-time work week at a job.
Yep.
Yes. One thing that Korey mentioned as far as like the time that we spend staying on top of the eczema and caring for the eczema, add that into school just started, and with the pandemic, people are trying virtual schooling. They're trying to hold their jobs. So what if you have a child who's delayed in learning and you have to spend time doing extra reading at night, but your creaming routine takes an hour to 2 hours if you're wet wrapping, or if you can't get a child in the bath or something like that. And then so you're having to make decisions, you have to pick what might slide, and then something came to mind. I remember my son, we had been to National Jewish, and we had come home and he was in a good place, but I was wet wrapping twice a day, every day. So morning and night. Well, that's kind of a 2-hour thing between the bath and leaving the wrappings on. And I remember it was Halloween, and there was a Halloween event going on at a local school, and we wanted to take him trick-or-treating, but I thought, well, I've either got to do this at like 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon to have his routine finished before we go out, or we just have to skip that. So that's part of where some of the social isolation comes from too. Like maybe you don't have the energy to go to a family gathering, even though you would love to see your support network. Like you would love to have a hug from your sister or whatever, but are you up for the trade-off, So I guess those are other things that are coming into play in our current climate too. Like with schooling the way it is for families, and a lot of kids, aside from learning delays to deal with, they may be on the spectrum or have other health conditions on top of the eczema. So things really get compounded quickly. Even like co-parenting, if you've got split families and you're trying to juggle the other parent caring for your child, imagine that stress too. You're doing your best to control what you can, and then you're trying to trust someone and be on the same page with another household to do the same. So that's something these families are dealing with.
And I also interviewed Dr. Jonathan Silverberg, who mentioned that divorce rates are also higher in parents who do have a child with eczema. He said that it's not significantly like a huge number higher, but he did mention that there is a difference, that you can see that it's higher. So I just found that very sad as well.
Mm-hmm.
Have you guys heard from any of your friends about how they're currently doing during the COVID times, being able to cope with their children and also the current COVID situation?
Well, so I'll just sort of segue a little bit. So actually, in response to this research, we created a program called the Support for Eczema Caregivers program. And it's designed to address some of the stress that we're seeing among eczema caregivers and to provide psychosocial support. So it's a mentoring program where we match a caregiver with another parent caregiver that's trained to provide listening support and help with stress reduction strategies and things like that. Keri's actually a mentor in that program, and she's worked with several parents. So she has a good sense for kind of where people are at, layering on the stress of caring for a child with eczema, with COVID, with, financial concerns, if there's job loss. There's a lot right now, and it's all kind of this stew of stuff that I think people are sorting through. So I guess I'll pass it to you to offer any insights that we're seeing from that program, which we launched this spring.
Yeah, that's kind of what I had on my mind. Some of the parents, like I had mentioned, are co-parenting, but they're also taking their children to work with them. They're just like all the other families in America, they're having to do this with, doctor's appointments to the allergist and telemedicine and whatever the new protocols are for the clinics when they're trying to get in. Just think of the time that takes alone, just getting to the doctor or calling your insurance. Like just that amount of time that we parents spend on medical care for our kids. But I will say that I have seen, I don't know if it's like personal friends of mine, but I know there have been some people who, with the quarantine, have felt like they've had more control over their child's environment, and they have seen good results from that. I don't know if you guys have seen that, but I know I've seen that a little bit over those first few months of closures, where people are like, their children are in their homes and they're eating their food and they just have more control over things. So it's kind of been an experiment for our eczema families. What else about our program? We, the goal is to like improve the caregiver's feelings, right? Like to help them feel empowered as the caregiver. So say there's a single mom, who is her support, right? If she lives in a town without family, who's going to make her a meal? She's 100% responsible for all meals, all skincare, all bills, all cleaning. It's just, it's a hard strain, and there's like not really an end for that. And that's what's hard, is with eczema being such a roller coaster. What if you do catch a breath for a few weeks and then you see that cycle start over again? And it's just chronic illness, I guess. But we wanted to help reduce that feeling of the lack of support. So even if we're not there to give a hug, we're there to check in and send a funny meme, to text them and say, how are you doing today? Like, let's just check in. Maybe that will help lift their spirits a little bit, just to know that somebody's checking on them. They're not doing all the checking. And to just help reduce their stress and isolation. We've had some families that are like, they're starting a new treatment. They might be starting Dupixent, and think of all the anxiety that comes with giving your child an injection for the first time of a biologic. Like this is, that's a hard day for some parents to be dealing with right now. Plus the anxiety of the pandemic on top of, just feeling like their kids are more high risk if we've got asthma and things like that going on. So that's my overview of the caregiver program. But I think so far I would call it a success. We've just been going for a little while, but we've put a lot of work into designing this with the caregivers in mind.
Yeah, I think the challenges that we see related, and it's in the study data too, is that because eczema is often viewed by the general public and even your family and friends as a rash, and at times they almost see you as being overly dramatic because it's having such a terrible impact on your life, and you're not coming to family gatherings, and you can't go out, and your child isn't going to Easter or whatever. People don't understand why this, something that's like acne or, other minor skin conditions can be devastating in the way that it is. And so I think one thing that's really nice about this caregiver program, and that I wish I had had back in the day, is the person you're talking to totally gets it. You're not going to have to explain for an hour that you've been up all night, that you are desperately trying to stop the scratching and you have limited tools and it's so hard. All of us get it. And it can be so isolating not to have that, because moderate to severe eczema is reasonably rare. Eczema is common, but tough eczema that's out of control, most of us don't know any other child who went through that, and our kids don't know another child that's going through that. And it can feel like you're the only one in the world who's experiencing this. So the caregiver program is nice because you're going to be on the phone, you're going to be texting to somebody who knows exactly what it's like. And it's like that first time you connect with somebody in life who really gets you in some way, it can be so liberating and wonderful to experience.
Yeah, that's such a wonderful initiative. I'm so glad that you're doing it. And it's just so nice of you guys. And I'm sure a lot of people appreciate it as well.
So far, we've been finding that to be the case. But I think, the other piece is that eczema families are really overburdened and stressed, and they've got a ton going on, and fitting in one more thing can be challenging. And then it's cyclical. So you want help on the day that the eczema was terrible, but when it subsides, you kind of want to put that behind you. So those are all the things that you need to kind of work with a condition like eczema. And, thankfully we've been pretty nimble, and also we get it because we've been there. So it's been a learning process for sure.
And I remember the doctor that I had interviewed about how much eczema actually impacts a person. He was telling me that he always asks them about their what he calls utility scores, and just the marker of the quality of their health and life as well. And he told me that the utility scores actually came close to the same scores as cancer patients. And he told me that his other doctors who treat cancer patients were so shocked to hear about that and to learn about how similar the scores were, and they didn't know that it could impact eczema patients so much. And so it just goes to show the huge burden and in the 9 areas that you mentioned, and how it can affect a person's life and a family's life so much too.
Mm-hmm.
Korey, did you want to mention the social media challenge we have going on Monday for caregivers?
Sure, yeah. So Monday is World Atopic Eczema Day. Atopic eczema can be a confusing term because, us patients use the word eczema and doctors use atopic dermatitis, and this is a weird, what do you call it? Evil twin amalgamation of the two, but it is essentially World Eczema Day. And what we're hoping to do around this to bring awareness about the true impact is to really highlight family stories. And so we have a competition or a giveaway going on where we're asking people to share their personal stories on Instagram and Facebook, and to do it on their public timeline so that, as many people can see it as possible. We're going to be, resharing it, reposting it, and giving away prizes all day on September 14th. So really hoping to raise awareness about the true impact, and B, support each other as families impacted by eczema so that we can see there's a community here that's on a similar journey. So yeah, that's another way that we're trying to address burden and raise awareness about this condition, because as you say, Abby, even the doctors don't know. They're seeing these kids for 15 minutes. They don't know what's happening in between. And it's our job to change that.
Yeah, definitely. So I would love to end by just having you guys each share 2 things. So I guess the number one thing is, how can our listeners support you guys? And also, if they do want your support, how can they find you? But also, I would love to hear what has been the biggest struggle for you guys in your family with a child who is or either was suffering from eczema.
Okay, well, maybe I'll take the first one, and we can give Keri some time to think.
Okay.
And I'll say I'm a bit to give myself some time to think. But I think, you know, in terms of how people can get involved was the number one, and number two was
how people can either get support from you guys or support you.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, yeah. Get support from us. You know, participate in our support for Eczema Caregivers program. If you're a caregiver, we would love to support you. It's a great program. It's free. There, you know, there's next year there's going to be monthly technical assistance meetings with other parents around self-care and things like that. Great program. Also, you can listen to our podcast, which is a little different than your podcast, which is awesome as well. But our podcast really focuses on eczema science. And so we review the scientific literature on eczema research every day and identify those hot topics or those transformational findings. And then we invite parents to be in conversation with researchers. During our episodes, it's called Eczema Breakthroughs, and you can find us in Spotify, Apple Podcast, and Google Podcast as well. Support us. I love that question. First, join our Facebook group where we share a lot, or our Instagram group about what's going on. You can get involved as a mentor if you have that in your capacity. We're always looking for parents to spread the word and get out there. And then we have actually 10 different initiatives that we're working on this year, in addition to the caregiver one and the podcast, where we're always looking for parents to get involved. So we have a ton going on. It'd take too long to talk about that probably today, but those are just a couple of ways. Keri, you want to talk about greatest struggle?
Oh, I wanted to mention our cool shirts. We've got some awesome shirts for Jeeper that are so pretty, and all of the caregivers that have gotten these have really loved them. So
I love it.
Those are on Etsy. You can get those on Etsy.
Share with me your Etsy link too, and I'll include it in the description.
Okay, sounds good.
So my question, I guess that's my turn, is what's the hardest thing been? Abby, is that right?
Yeah, struggle.
So it's something I mentioned earlier, but the inability to fix what's happening. Like you don't have any control. I think Korey mentioned something yesterday on our social media. It's like the weather. You can't control it, and it's just you just have to deal with the storms. So that's really hard mentally. So the mental toll between as a mom and then as a dad and then in your marriage and with siblings, like nobody can fix it. And if I had to give like a moment, Abby, you might remember this from More Than Skin Deep, but I was just driving down the road from visiting family a couple hours away, and my son was so bad off, and I was big pregnant with my second child, and so super hormonal and really sleep deprived, and then just stressed out. And I just remember thinking, like, how can he live like this? His skin is his largest organ, and it's not functioning right. It's not keeping the good in, and it's not keeping the bad out. So how do we live like this? And I didn't mean like, what's our quality of life? Like, how are we going to get by? I meant like, how is he actually going to survive in this world that we live in? How his body will maintain. So I just remember being in a really dark place then and thinking, like, what if I lose him? You know? So that's the hardest. That's been, there's the overall, the umbrella of not being able to fix it. And then there's those moments that just stick with you. And we used to listen to this, you know how when you have a new baby born, you kind of give the sibling a gift. Well, we got him the CD, and it was like Raffi songs. I guess rap is probably from like the 80s, but I didn't know him when I was a kid. But somebody recommended his song, so we would put this DVD in when my second child was born, and that's like the soundtrack of our eczema hell. So when I hear these sweet little childhood songs, I just go back to that bad time, like in an instant. So songs and like just little things can just take you back. And so that's what's crazy, is like it's such a traumatic time, and I don't know where I was going with that, but you can look back and just be transported back to that time. And that's been the hard part. But now that I'm on the other side, I get to help other families see their way through. And like Korey said, I didn't really have that. I had great friends, but I didn't feel like there was any way out. And people need to see that.
Mm-hmm.
That's so beautiful. I really appreciate you for sharing that and really being so open and raw about what you went through as well, because I know it wasn't easy.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yeah, for kind of similar to Keri in a lot of ways, but for me, I think the hardest part was trying something that had worked for other people and getting my hopes up and getting my son's hopes up and then having it not work. And the hopelessness, I think, that sets in sometimes. And I just remember when my son was 5, I'd said, "Oh, I've heard about this treatment, and I think it might work for you. And let's give it a try." And he just said to me, "Mom, it's not going to work." And I just thought, "Oh no!" At 5, he already has kind of given up, and he's been through so much with trying so many treatments that were uncomfortable or painful or horrible and didn't work, that he'd kind of lost that spirit. So that was kind of a low moment for me, for sure, to feel like he resigned to being uncomfortable and not having a treatment in that way at such a young age, when I knew we had to keep fighting and keep struggling and keep looking in order for it to end. So I think there's those moments like that you have where you're just tired of being disappointed, and your child is too. And that can be really tough, to feel like maybe there isn't something for us, and maybe I should stop looking and I should stop trying. Both Keri and I did find something that worked for our kids, and thankfully, they're doing great. So I always like to say to other parents out there, don't stop looking, and there are better options now, and you will find something. So keep the hope alive, and don't lose that fighting spirit. But for sure, there are low moments, and we've all been there. So I think that's.
I also want to quickly share mine. For me, I went through extremely severe eczema, and for me, a lot of foods really flared up my skin when I was going through my episodes of having really severe flare-ups, and it was really traumatic. And when my son was younger, my mother-in-law would watch him, but she didn't understand like food and like how much food impacted me. So she didn't understand like certain foods could also affect him too. And thankfully he only had mild eczema, and thankfully he's good now as well, and he doesn't really have eczema now. But yeah, it's just it felt like all the work that I had put into trying to build up his immune system and give him a healthy foundation, it just felt like no one really understood. And even sometimes my husband wouldn't know how to feed him in the same way. So that was the tough part for me. But I know so many people have a lot of other struggles as well. And I'm just really appreciative and thankful that you guys opened up and shared about the struggles that you guys went through.
Too.
Thank you for having us, Abby.
Yeah, my pleasure. It was great to hear more about your organization and everything that you're doing. I really appreciate you guys. Any last words before we head off?
No, share your story for Atopic Eczema Day. Join us if it sounds of interest to you, and we're just happy to be part of the movement. So thanks for including us.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here.